One of the intriguing things you said was, obviously one of the greatest, if not the greatest concern people have about nuclear power is the safety issue. One of the statements you made was that Chernobyl was a result of human error and poor, what was the next, technology or design, which wouldn't happen in the U.S. Because of safety requirements. I appreciate your, on the one hand, your faith in, lack of human error in the United States. Although, given that some of our scientists may want to run over and become nuclear, it seems at the same time you say that there's a concern. Investors don't want to invest because there are too many safety requirements or too many regulations. So I'm interested in that inherent contradiction there. How do you convince me that we can reduce the regulations enough to entice investors and yet not reduce them so much that we all blow up?
Anyone.
Sorry, meltdown.
You guys are all even up there. Anybody can tell you.
This question. Chernobyl was because the Russians really, or the Soviets really didn't have any way of cooling the system, and it wasn't automated, right? Like, they have to manually turn on the cooling system. They have to manually make sure that it's contained. They have to manually, people have to do it, essentially. In the United States, it wasn't the same. When 3 Mile Island happened, this is actually a myth that 3 Mile Island proves that, nuclear is unsafe. When 3 Mile Island happened, it was because someone literally turned off the cooling system. I'm pretty sure there are not that many people who are smart enough to do that today.
But isn't that human error?
This is human error. However, 3 Mile Island is a great example of how it works, because immediately the radioactive waste got collapsed in by the way that the reactor works. The reactor works where it collapses whenever a meltdown occurs. And so eventually this radioactive waste eventually became buried and just it didn't cause any problems. This is shown by the fact that there was no deaths from 3 Mile Island. There was absolutely, people were scared.
A lot of litigation, though, over people not being able to live there.
Right, people were scared, but it doesn't mean that something actually happened. It was just people are scared.
Mr. McCarroll, did you have a similar question you wanted to address to the other team, or was that?
No, that was
okay.
My question.
Okay. Other questions from the panel? Yes, sir.
So I'm still where I was. And as usual, I'm about a half an hour intellectually behind Melissa. So I'm taking the negative seriously that we all agree about climate change. So I don't have any problem about prioritizing the values here, because even if we're all working, if we're going to be toast, which is the 6%, evidence. We got to get this climate change thing done. That's a given. I'm taking that given unless the negative takes it away from me. So then it all comes down for me to how are we going to do this. So I got 2 very simple factual questions, one for each team. First of all, did my brother actually get it right that your goal, which I thought was go from 2% to 20% and then to 40, then 60, did you really mean a 20% increase, which by my math, and I did pretty well on the SAT math, would bring you to 2.4% by 2017, which is the way he read it, and nobody denied it? Or did you mean it the way I first thought, which is get the 20, in which case I want to hear a lot from you about how, through unfunded mandates in this economy, you're going to press that far. And for you folks over here, I got to tell you something. My man Jacob there was pretty persuasive in answering Melissa's question about this billion versus 10 to 12 billion. I mean, I got on my brief a whole line of things that he said. He said, first of all, you're talking about a plant they're not going to build. They're going to build these fancy plants that don't exist, as my brother pointed out. Okay, so you're building a different animal. You're building it 30 years later, for God's sake. I was still in law school in 1979. And there's been something called inflation, and you're going to build it under the American rules, not the French rules, so don't tell me what the French are doing. I mean, you got to give me a cost for this, and then tell me what you're going to get done, if I heard you right, for $300 million a year, because that's what you're going to. So somebody's got to make one of these 2 plants work, or we're toast with either proposal, whether it's 2 variations of the topic or because of an etymological difference, essentially an argument over topicality that makes the negative and you the affirmative. So this, you want to just correct me. I got 2 essentially factual questions for you What do you mean? And if you really mean what I thought, how the heck are you going to get there? Because you've shown no evidence that you can. And in the second instance, what does the cost of what you're actually claiming to build, and where are you getting the money from?
Okay, Judy, we'll start with you.
First of all, Mr. Sexton, you are right. It is actually a 20%.
I'm just John. I'm not a doctor or anything.
It is 20% of the national energy portfolio. So that means we're increasing from 2% to 20% of all the energy. And we will get there. Like, we have our Freeman and our Cooper and Zoical, like, evidence both state that we will get there because we will mandate that the utility companies and that we will mandate that they have to get there or they'll face repercussions. So if everybody increases...
Put it next to a nuclear plant or something.
Right. Well, something less bomb-y. But essentially, basically, if everybody all contribute to the effort, it can be done and it will be done as proven by our author advocates.
But you're not giving any incentives.
That's right.
We're mandating it.
They're just going to tell them they got to get there, and they're going to get there.
Yes.
That's right.
Okay.
Sure, of course you can.
Pardon me. Do you have some evidence or support for the notion that this mandate is feasible by 2017?
Oh, yes. Like I've said, the Freeman evidence and the Cooper and Zoical evidence both state that it is actually feasible. It's 40% by 2027 and also 60% by 2037. So that would really help with the global warming problem as proposed by.
And so you'd help at least two people who are going to vote on the panel. Could you refresh us on that piece about the Freeman evidence? What did it say?
Well, the Freeman evidence basically, wait, is that a separate question?
We're give you the 30
We're
seconds.
doing a little free
Don't worry about it.
where we're actually following up. And
yes, that's
yeah.
He gets to do whatever he wants.
That's pretty much the deal.
If you want me to push a negative ballot.
Okay. Basically, the Freeman evidence talks about how right now, currently, nobody ever gives incentives to renewables, and therefore utilities don't want to do renewables because of the upfront costs that renewables have. But if you mandate an RPS, then they'll be forced to do this, and eventually it will pay off. It's just that the upfront cost is relatively higher. But also, the Freeman evidence basically says that it will happen that by 2017, we will be able to reach this amount basically from the joint effort from the nation, like from the utilities, from the government, et cetera.
Can we hop over here to the second half of President Sexton's question, and then if Mr. Brewer has something he wants to come back to here, we'll do that. But this will get us a little more on square, not that that's that big a deal. But this needs to be somebody other than Crystal. The other two are still a little off, so whoever would like to take that. Do you need the question, or do you need Dr.?
Yeah, could we get that question again?
President Sexton, could you remind them?
Just give me something that would dislodge Jacob's litany of reasons why your cost figure is off, and some way that if the cost figure, which is what I believe as I sit here right now, is going to be considerably higher than $1 billion for these new animals, how are you going to get there with the appropriation you're talking about?
All right. Let's refer back to what we said about the costs. We essentially did say that it's inflation adjusted, $1 billion inflation adjusted. The negative said that it's not inflation adjusted, but we in fact said that it was. And so that does take into account because it's over a few decades in the last reactor we built.